panel discussions that we had on the effects of global white supremacy. And a person asked what, at first glance, seemed like a rational question, but after you thought about it, the question was totally irrational. They said, "Oh, you did 2 of those already, right?" I said, "Yes." "Well, why do you have to do a 3rd one?" 300 years of global white supremacy. Why are we doing a 3rd one? Because it's still happening. It's real simple. It's still happening. But the beauty of what has happened in relationship to where we are right now is that we are moving into a new horizon. And many brothers and sisters are part of that experience as you are here. It is another level of awakening, a new consciousness that is happening. And we're very pleased at this particular point because this doesn't appear to be a fad. This is not something that's going to be here for a minute. And they're going to shuttle Superfly in and John Shaft and kind of do a number on it. This is not going to be like the end of the 60s going into the 70s. It's not going to be that. And it's a real simple premise that we operate from in relationship to this particular discussion and to our understanding of it. It's that we too have a Holocaust. And millions strong were killed and lost. And they didn't come by invitation. They were brought here to build the nation. You see, we slaved and we worked this land. I'm talking about the African, the ones their ships went out to raid, the ones Uncle Sam never paid. Now, we, the children of the sun of a new generation under the gun, we watch today on TV news as groups of angry Hasidic Jews storm into a police station, suffer no kind of retaliation, put a single black man in that situation, and he be dead by assassination. No justice, no peace. We understand. And what we have at this particular point is a mission. This is the 3rd in this particular series. And certainly it's something the slave is about every day, something that we're about every day. But more and more it is becoming more clear to me that radio or presentations of this sort really are not of any real and significant benefit unless we all understand that we have an obligation to pass this information on to brothers and sisters who are not listening to the radio and who are not here at the slave theater tonight. That's your responsibility. So you aren't here tonight on an entertainment trip or on an entertainment trip for that matter. You are here to record this information and then to become mini transmitters of this information. So that when you go back home, you've got to figure out how to put this information on the dinner table at night. You've got to figure out how to take it back into your church. You've got to figure out how to take it back to your job. You've got to figure out how to spread this information around until there are no black people who are still asleep in New York City. That is your responsibility. We celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King this week, and Dr. King has one particular speech which is an exceptional one as well, and it's called Sleeping Through a Revolution. Some of you may have heard that speech. And we got some folks who are sleeping through the revolution. You got to be real clear. And the frightening part about it is we live with some of them. Some of them are our best friends. There is nothing more amazing than what happens if you begin to expose yourself to information and to consciousness over a period of time, and then you meet someone, a friend of yours, who has not been exposed to the same information over a number of years, and they are still back where you were 5, 10 years ago, with no awareness of what is going down. Now, it's one thing to kind of go, you don't know about Kemet? Oh, wow. You don't know about subliminal seduction, But it's a whole other recognition that you and I have a responsibility to educate those brothers and sisters, to bring them up to snuff. We've said before that in the information age, what you don't know can kill you. These are our loved ones who don't know. These are our friends. These are our family. These are our extended family. These are our people. So I'm charging you tonight. I'm charging you each and every day from this point forward into this new year of 1992 and the rest of this decade of the 90s to take on the responsibility of not just getting the information, which you already have done and you already are doing, but take the responsibility of spreading the information. Become a missionary, but with a real mission, not the one that got us in this situation in the first place. And you all know what that was about. It was said very well. Bishop Tutu made the statement. He said, you know, when the missionaries came, he said, they had the book and we had the land. They said, we looked up a few years later, they had the land and we had the book. We want to turn that whole scenario around. And that's what the effects of global white supremacy have done to us. And so this particular experience tonight is one which has a mission to raise your consciousness, but to raise your consciousness so that you not only become warriors, but you go out and create warriors and create a great nation for us to overcome white supremacy, and it can be done. Let us welcome our brothers who participate in this panel, who've taken our consciousness up each week, and each time that we've done this step by step. We will start first of all with an honored elder. He is someone who I marvel at all the time, and even more so somehow in the last 6 or 8 months. I don't know what he is doing. I do not know what he has done in terms of diet. I don't know I take Chinese herb, I take everything, right, to keep my energy working and moving. I don't know what he is doing. I don't know if it's meditation and whatever else, but something has been happening that is on top of the level of genius that he normally operates on, normally anyway. He is moving on another plane of consciousness, and you are honored to be in his presence tonight. I'm speaking, of course, of Dr. John Henrik Clarke. And that's not just my opinion. Attorney Maddox and I were like talking off the side of the stage, and I said, have you noticed what's happening with Dr. He said, yeah. Oh, it's on to another wavelength. And for those of you who do not have the book, African World Revolutions, get the book. Do not let tomorrow pass without getting the book, because the kind of consciousness that we're talking about is there in that book. I mean, you will certainly experience it tonight, but get it and study it, because when we talk about this issue of overthrowing global white supremacy, Dr. John Henrik Clarke has laid very much the blueprint in that publication, African World Revolutions. Our next brother is someone who's been dealing on the level of the mind. And it's interesting because the reality is, when we talk about global white supremacy, if you go for that, it's a mental trip. You know, one of my children was upset about something that happened on Donahue the other day, because there was a brother, quote unquote, every brother ain't a brother. And the brother came on TV saying, well, I'm not into that African thing, I'm an American. Right? Okay? And he proceeded to talk about what made him an American. Now you gotta understand, clearly we know he was not born with a red, white, and blue heart. We know that. We're clear about that now, right? His blood did not come that color. But the fact of the matter is, he had looked at what America seemed to stand for, and he was saying to the world, I embrace that. I accept that. That's me. If you saw Roots last night, I've seen it 100 times. And every time I see it, there's something a little new on this issue of the mind. When I saw Fiddler last night, after he didn't understand why Kunta Kinte would take all those lashes rather than say his name was Toby. And when Fiddler finally got the reality of what was happening and said to him, brother, he said, it don't matter. It don't matter what they think your name is Kunta Kinte. And that was a slave whose mind was freed. You see, now he was still on the plantation. He had never left the plantation, but he was free in that moment through the efforts of an African who stood tall in his African heritage. So it starts here in the mind. Free dome, the Latin, free your mind and you know what will follow. I don't have to tell you that. That's a P-Funk vibe, so you understand that. This next brother has dedicated himself to the issue of us beginning to understand the way in which our minds have been manipulated. But at the same time, and perhaps more importantly than just what they call pathology, he's also dealing with how we free ourselves from the pathology. May we welcome Dr. Amos Wilson to the stage. I like what Dr. Wilson said today inside the GBE. He said, we're going to talk tonight about global white supremacy, but we're going to talk about how to defeat global white supremacy. And we're all for that. No question. Okay, so now, you got this thing happening now where the world powers are all trying to come together. Right. Especially the European powers. Right? Europe, 1992. Fall of Soviet Union. You know, you've seen all of the European powers, they're scrambling, trying to get together because they're afraid of the Asian menace that's coming right on them right now. And I'm talking about they're scared to death. They'll do anything rather than see what can happen if Japan and China decide to hook up as one in some economic concept. They are not idiots, okay? Now, in the context of that, what is interesting is that we see sometimes the political dynamics. You know, we look at them and we can catch some of them. We can see sometimes the economic dynamics. But what we sometimes miss are the legal dynamics of what all this means. Because you can't possibly be thinking that all of these unions are going on, all this networking that's happening, and that there isn't going to be a legal effect, something that's going to ultimately affect your rights, not just here where you are, but wherever global white supremacy is. And this particular brother stands right now as our champion. He stands as our champion because he not only got the decree and he got all of the things that go along with that, he not only learned the law, but he decided to do something that Dr. Amos Wilson talked about today. When Dr. Wilson talked about what was going on with the U.S. meeting the Japanese, he said the scary thing for the U.S. is they walk into a business meeting and it looks at first like they're sitting across from Japanese businessmen, but those businessmen are samurai. Samurai. They are warriors. They have come to cut heads off. Okay? And when we talk about that kind of warrior spirit, that kind of warrior consciousness, there is no one who has stepped into a courtroom and done it better than this brother, who is our teacher today, Brother Attorney Alton Knox. All right, you know the theme, the effects of global white supremacy. It is going to be covered from our guests from several different perspectives. One historical, one psychological, and one legal. We will start with our elder and the historical, Dr. John Henrik Clarke.
Thank you again. We have a lot of work to do, short time to do it. After we have finished the 3 lectures, there should be 4, but we're going to start for 3. The lecture will be transcribed. All of us will take our respective lectures and build in the documents, and I will edit all of the lectures into a book and start. All right. The book will contain, in addition to an extension of what we have said here, the major documents on the extension of global white supremacy all over the world, how it started, Greek attitudes, Roman attitudes, even the attitudes of semi-white people like the Arabs, who will separate custom from religion, things that you believe to be the truth that is really folklore. It's so difficult to get people to recognize that certain things were imposed on you that were alien to your society, that came out of other societies, and you accept these things, you're willing to kill each other over them, and there's a word of truth in it. All right, we don't have time for any form of chit-chat. The focus of my talk, all too short given the subject, the focus of the talk will be global white supremacy from the end of the 19th century to the middle of the 20th century and the African independence explosion. Now, when it happened at the end of the 19th century, African people all over the world had engaged in protracted revolutions and had given themselves something they need right now, something their children need right now, something all of them misinterpreted and removed from their memory, the longest revolutionary heritage of any people on the face of the earth. Giving up a true revolutionary heritage, they began to follow people who didn't know where they were going. They began to accept books called the Bible. They began to hear stories about the rescue of a Holy Grail. Number one, wasn't holy. Number two, wasn't laws. Number three, wasn't there in the first place. There is an essential myth through the life of most of the people in the world. Now, with the interpretation of the curricula as a feel-good curricula, the criticizers of our desire for a correct curricula have had nothing but a feel-good curriculum. But they don't want anyone else in the world to feel good. Now, if they stop telling lies about themselves and integrate our truth, maybe all of us can feel good together, and you have universal humanity other than global white supremacy. What the fight over the curricula is about their claiming things that they couldn't possibly have produced, because the things that they claim are older than their existence. It came up this morning on WWRL, a man or a lady, They quoted about some 12 gates. And the names of the 12 gates. Give me this name. Gates to the holy city. I said, that presupposes that I believe the story in the first place. It also presupposes that I accept Jerusalem as the Holy Land. And I do not. I have no Holy Land outside of the physical property of Africa. So what you are calling Jerusalem and what you are calling the Middle East or Western Asia was once an African colony and an extension of Africa. But the first holy city that the Africans declared or any other people declared in the whole world is Abydos. And that city is still there intact. Jerusalem has been destroyed several times. And Jerusalem was given to us out of someone else's folklore, or we ignore the city we built with our own hands, still standing, not holy by us, because someone else told us another city was holy. Now, as we came down to the end of the 19th century, the Africans had been engaged in anti-colonial war. Global white supremacy had manifested itself in the form of slavery. We had had 400 years of it by now. Europe had recovered at our expense. The products from Jamaica, Haiti, and other West Indian islands had restored the economy of Europe. South America, that mulatto continent, contributed very little to Europe then, contributed very little to Europe now. The race in between was in conflict with itself, not with the conversation here, because these want to be whites. I wish the hell I was white, pretending that they are white. That's another lecture, another day. When I have enough strong men to protect me from the podium to the street where the car is running, and get me the hell out of here and keep me being killed, I will deliver the lecture on the role of the bastards in history. The people created by the coming together of blacks and whites who go through life, in most cases, debating whether they're loyal to their mother's people or their father's people, not knowing that every time they knock on their father's door, their father won't open the door, leaving them with no other door to come into but their mother's people's door. And yet, so many times they have no loyalty to their mother's house. In Africa, they had fought 100 years of colonial wars. These Africans who never wore a store-bought shoe or heard of a military school, in their fight against global white supremacy, had out-generaled some of the finest military minds of Europe.
And whose word do we have for this? A young British reporter named Winston Churchill, in a book called The River War, dealing with the British retaking of the Sudan, and another one called A Roving Commissioner, dealing with the Boer War in South Africa. These Africans did not concede that anyone had the right to take over their country. So the Asante Wars in what is now Ghana, the wars along the East Coast, engineered, brought into being by Islam, Europe, after chattel slavery was turned into another form of slavery called colonialism, a more sophisticated kind of slavery and more profitable. You're less responsible for the upkeep of the slave, and yet he has no choice but to work with you because you destroyed his way of life. He must now survive by serving you. You torn down his trees, you killed his farm life, you laughed at his gods, you told him his clothes was ugly so he not wears your clothes. You reduced him to a vassal by demeaning his culture and demeaning him. Some traditional Africans who would not wear their clothes, adopt their tastes, decided to fight. They did not go to London, to Whitehall Street. They did not go and laugh at the smiling lady under the chandelier. The minute the African went to London and saw a chandelier and had a cocktail in hand, he was doomed. So global white supremacy was manifesting itself in many ways because they had produced a mechanism of control. Now having controlled the body, they wanted to control the mineral wealth of Africa. They knew then what you still do not know. Africa is and has always been the world's richest continent.
All right.
And we are a rich people who are poor because we have not understood our riches. That juvenile delinquent who came out of Europe shooting babies in the back and calling himself a superior man at least knew something about the African who befriended him. He knew that he was politically naive. At the end of the 19th century, the Africans had 100 years of fighting this supremacy. The European had created a literature trying to justify his superiority. This literature had to deal with the brain side, head measurement, a whole lot of things that had absolutely no scientific basis. Now people looking for the missing link. The missing link cannot be possibly found any place except in Europe. So they created a man in Europe, took a skeleton, buried the skeleton, dug it up. Didn't have any ancient history, so he got to create some. In the meantime, there were Europeans debunking all of this. No one paid any attention to then or now. But in the closing years of the 19th century, there was a royal prostitute in Belgium named Leopold, who had houses of joy in different capitals of Europe, and he was spending a whole lot of money on these houses because he kept them the year round and sometimes could use them about once or twice a year. He's looking around for capital. There are nations in Europe who did not get in on the slicing up of Africa. They would call a conference at Berlin, where they would split up the rest of Africa with all those got a little muscle. The Germans got a big slice. The Germans got 4 nice pieces. Southwest Africa, now Namibia, the Cameroons, Togoland, now Togo, and Tanzania. They began almost a rehearsal for Nazism in Africa because the civilian governor of Southwest Africa was Jewish. The military governor was Herman Goering's father.
No.
If I didn't know what the documents, I wouldn't be saying it. Now, with these colonial wars being fought, African kings, so-called chiefs, been either driven into exile, driven to suicide. What do we got now? In the closing years of the 19th century, you got missionary-trained Africans who are now petitioning the European, appealing to his conscience, not knowing he had no conscience, where power is concerned. There's no conscience to appeal to. Thou shalt not, the religion that says thou shalt not was meant for you. He gave that to you. He didn't intend to obey. Now after the Berlin Conference, and France getting more colonial territory, Germany getting colonial territory, Belgium getting the big Congo, Portuguese getting a little piece, all of the gangsters agreed on the slice. No African attending. And at this conference, an American Stanford allegedly attended the conference, saying as his rationale that the Congo might one day be a place to settle American blacks. Abraham Lincoln went through that same charade. Now you want to know what would have happened had Abraham Lincoln not been shot. I'm sorry he got shot. But had he not been shot, he had a movement to get all of us out of here. Even to the corner of Brazil, any place, let's get you out of here. And why he did not believe in slavery, because it was an unwieldy labor system. He didn't believe in your presence and said point blank, you will never be the social equal of a white person in any case. So while you are welcome celebrating Lincoln's birthday, do a little sobering thinking and read Lerone Bennett's famous article, Was Abraham Lincoln a White Racist? He asked the question and he answered the question affirmatively. He was.
All right.
Now, as we come down to the end of the 19th century, Africa is shifting gears. The warriors are leaving the field. The missionary-trained African activists are moving on the field. In Ghana, a brilliant politician, E.K. Hayford, is in charge of the youth. They exiled King Prempeh and his cousin, Ye Asantewaa, who led the last of the Shanti Wars. And these wars were really wars to maintain European control over Africa, therefore a part of global white supremacy. At this juncture, we see North Africa coming under the French, We see the Arab who's a colonizer and a slaver being colonized. We saw resistance coming within this whole structure, and yet we see an intellectual movement existing in Africa in reaction to the continuous presence of the Europeans. Along the coast of East Africa, Somalia, a man named Muhammad bin Abdullah Hassan, the British called the Mad Mullah, had fought the British up until about 1923. Along the coast of West Africa, the Asante Wars in Ghana had lasted from 1805 until 1900, when the exile Ye Asante War. After the exile Ye Asante War, Casey Hayford started a campaign for the return of the royal families and converted that campaign into a fight for independence. And when he died in 1931, he sent for a young student, Joseph B. Dunkwa, to send for J.P. and said, J.P., the mantle is yours. Joseph B. Dunkwa, in turn, had a young student under his wing called Francis K. Nkrumah. Francis K. Nkrumah, after attending the Pan-African Conference in 1945 in Manchester, England, was broke and in London, and like a whole lot of Africa, eking out a mere existence, serving the unfulfilled British woman. Sinbad Drake, unfortunately deceased now, he says, when we get together, he said, John, one of these days I'm going to tell a real story about these African heads of state and what they had to do to get along. I said, Sinbad, have another cocktail. Sinbad, have another cocktail. I'm going to tell a real story. He never, the real story. I'm glad he never told the real story. My main point is that Joseph B. Dunkwa sent for his former student that until the end of his days he addressed as Francis K. Nkrumah. He never called him Kwame, just like he was in the classroom. And Nkrumah, being brought home to take the mantle of leadership from Dunkwa, got impatient, and instead of waiting for the mantle to be handed to him traditionally, seized the mantle and led the country to independence. Had he waited for it 2 more years, it could have been done more peacefully. There could have been a mixture of tradition and modernism. It would have been a much better state with the infusion of traditional government. Now, we were now becoming a prize to be captured because the land, the resources of Africa becoming a prize to be captured. Africans were now relating to Africans in the Caribbean and Africans in the United States. A great Caribbean figure, Edmund Blyden, had proclaimed and literally prophesied the concept of black studies in his inaugural address, Liberia College, 1881. He had already written his crowning masterpiece, deserved to be reread right now, Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race. All of us are mixed up on all the subjects. We're mixed up on all forms of religion. We're mixed up on all forms of politics. The European was still justifying the domination of other people through politics. All right, now, we had at the end of the 19th century a better Pan-African network when it took 2 months for a letter to be delivered than we've got right now. People were not boasting of any island they came from. The Africans understood the artificial nature of the state divided by foreigners. Some of them understood the artificial nature of the religion imposed on them by foreigners. All of this was a form of global white supremacy. All over the world, it began to happen. It had reached Asia. In China, the Europeans had their own courts. In Shanghai, there was hotels. The Chinese and dogs not allowed. And some of the people who will spit on you now were then being spit upon. All this is documented. Edgar Snow's work, another work called 400,000 Customers. The only Chinese woman that could go into one of the hotels had to be a prostitute or a cleaning woman. This kind of humiliation. The British had reduced an entire nation to dope, to opium. You think you can't survive crack? They were worse off than you ever were. If they survived it, you can survive it. But you ain't going to survive unless you crack some head. In the 1880s, an admiral named Perry kicked open the door of Japan, told him, trade for the West, whether you like it or not. No, it's earlier than that. The Japanese were minding their own business. The silkworm, making that beautiful kimono, wooden shoes. Didn't even have a decent wheelbarrow. Never heard of a Toyota or a Datsun. When people are asleep, sometimes it's best to leave them alone. Now, I'm going to show you what they did that you still got to do until you stop. Until you do it, you are jiving about independence, about freedom. A Japanese educator called in the youth of Japan and told them what had happened. And he sent them to the leading schools of the world, to get that information, get that technology. And if they smear that body waste in your face, apologize for having your face in the way. So he sent them to MIT. They went to military schools in the United States, wouldn't even let a black person sweep the floor. 2/3 of all the field officers that faced America in the Pacific War were trained in America. Every field officer, practice training. Virginia Military Academy was the main trainer. Black men it's not even there, even now. My main point is that by 1905, the Japanese had learned enough to take on a European nation. And when the Russians started messing with them, they started kicking butt. And they defeated them. Right. And this shocked Europe so much until they began to propagate something called the Yellow Danger. This is beginning in the basis of anti-Asianism. Manifests itself in the stereotypes in the movies. A Japanese detective called Mr. Moto, Fu Manchu, Charlie Chan. And what do we have? That's been fetched. Their control over the movies, all of this is global white supremacy. Their control, their colonization of the Bible. They're sending down Sunday school lesson with all white angels. Every single thing that came out of the European mind was meant to facilitate his control over the world. He's got no hesitation about it, and he's got no apology. You buying his hook, line, and sinker. You buying his concept. All religion is good when it is practiced good. All religion can be bad, but all religion that I know of is used for one people to control another people. Because they killed the spirituality in the religion itself. The missionaries were handmaidens of colonialism, and they still are. The African trained by the missionaries began to react. So global white supremacy was manifesting itself in the commerce of the world of that day. The Caribbean islands now realize that while their independence, their emancipation came 30 years before Black America, their emancipation was a faith, and ours was a faith. And when you're boasting, all you're saying that my bakery came before your bakery. So many of them, the rebels, went back to the hills. The best example is uprising in Jamaica, 1865, in Moret Bay. George Gordon and that crowd. Now, in the United States, because of the pressure, we had produced the greatest line of intellect of any people living outside of Africa. The climate was cold in New England. You could only work a slave 6 months a year. So you begin to have slave carpenters, slave craftsmen. You would farm them out. You begin to develop industrial slaves. They made a little money on the side. They could buy their way out of indentury. It wasn't quite as difficult. They began to read, write, run newspapers. Frederick Douglass escaped into this group. Yet the concept of getting back to Africa was prevalent. 5,000 Africans in this country had fought with the British against American independence, an incident left out of history. After the British lost the war, they had to get rid of them. So the British sent them to Canada and to Nova Scotia. Global white supremacy is now manifesting itself in the failure to acknowledge that every American citizen is a citizen. If you're a citizen, you need no civil rights movement and no civil rights action. The fact that you need it proves that they have not acknowledged you as a citizen. In a nation of immigrants, we are the immigrants against our will. We are the only immigrants who were invited here. Right. The nature of the invitation will not be discussed here. They were anxious to get us here. We had an affirmative action program waiting for us. No unemployment. No pay either. We transformed this nation. My main point is that the first half of this 19th century We were fighting against global white supremacy in the Back to Africa movement that had started during the American Revolution, the movement to settle Liberia, 1847, with Martin